Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you everyone for being here. Looks like we're all here now. We're ready to start. So a big welcome to the Alcohol Distilleries Compliance Campaign webinar. It's brought to you by SWSA in conjunction with Distillers South Australia. We are delighted that you can be with us today to unpack, what SafeWork is doing in this space. And we're very fortunate to have some industry experts here on the panel, both from a regulatory perspective and also from a distilling perspective, people from the industry. So this is great news. It's great news. Before I introduce the panel, I would like to formally acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the land on which we're presenting and recognise their cultural and heritage beliefs. I would also like to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending from other parts of South Australia today. Now, to introduce our panel, as I mentioned previously, we've got some heavyweights with us today, together with SafeWork leadership to unpack the issues. So I suppose this may be a daunting topic for some, so hopefully these guys will be able to guide you through step by step what's been going on and what will be happening in the near future and alleviate some of that, I suppose, worry. We're going to hear from the manager of the inspectorate, Mark Hume. Thank you for being here, Mark. Thanks, Mark. We're going to have Dave Barrett join us shortly. Dave is the team leader of the manufacturing and primary industry team here at SafeWork. So thank you, Dave, for your time.
Yeah, morning, everyone.
We've got the president of Distillers SA here, George Georgiadis, in the house. George is also otherwise known as the founder and general manager of Never Never Distillery. So thank you very much for your time today, George.
Hey, everyone.
And we have Ian Schmidt, an extremely experienced distiller and producer from making some of the finest whiskey in Australia. Lucky enough to be done here in our very own backyard in South Australia. So that's Tin Shed Distilling Co. Thank you very much, Ian. I hope you can hear me and you're part of our group here now. I can see that he's here. He's got his microphone muted, so we'll assume that he's listening along intently. So let's take a look at what we'll be talking about today. Beg your pardon, I haven't actually shown you that list of panel participants. And my name is David Knight. I'm an education and engagement advisor here at SafeWork. So let's take a look at what we're going to talk about today. And hopefully, if you look down this list of topics, you'll find some things which hopefully will answer some of your questions. If we get to the end of the session outline today and there's anything left over that you're unsure about or you'd like to have addressed as a question, I will ask that you use the Q&A or the chat function to ask your questions, and then we'll hopefully be able to pose some of those questions to George, Ian and the SafeWork team and see if we can't, answer all of those questions as we go along. It's just first question I've actually already been asked is, are we recording? We are recording this today. So if you know of someone who couldn't attend today, we will be uploading a recording of this session after it's complete. So let's take a look at the topics. We're going to find out more about the regulator and the reason behind the safety campaign. We will talk about the hazards that the safety audit will be focused on. So if you're wondering what we're looking for, that will be discussed. What to expect when an inspector calls, what is meant by separation distances, intrinsic safety equipment. There's been some discussion about a safety course or a white card equivalent, so we're going to discuss that, and the positive case for safety audits in the industry. So why is that a good thing? We'll also be mentioning what the difference is between an improvement notice and a prohibition notice, and then of course, as I mentioned, some time for Q&A at the end. So we've got a lot of ground to cover today. So I'm going to kick it off with Dave and Mark, who are going to tell us a little bit about the compliance campaign and what to expect. So thanks, guys. I'll hand over to you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name's Mark. I'm manager of the inspectorate at SafeWork SA. just as a bit of background, we'll let you know who the regulator is. So Safe Work is the Work Health and Safety and Industrial Relations regulator for the South Australian Government. We're a fairly diverse regulator that we cover areas like chemicals, mining industry, our major hazard facilities, explosives, amusement devices, high-risk work licensing, so forklift, EWPs, pressure vessels that people that have got large pressure vessels as part of their manufacturing process come under the licensing of Safe Work SA. Within the regulator itself, we're broken up into numerous teams. So the team that is looking after this particular campaign is our manufacturing and primary industries team. But we also have designated teams for community business services, wholesale retail transport, our industrial relations and psychosocial team, and we have a regional team which we have regional offices in Port Lincoln, Whyalla, Port Pirie and Mount Gambier. So we cover quite a diverse area. Generally, inspectors that are within industry teams will do reactive work where we get a notifiable incident where someone's been injured in a workplace, or we get a complaint about a workplace or a activity that's occurring, that an inspector will go out and have a look at the validity of the complaint, or have a look at the circumstances of the incident that's occurred within a workplace where a person may have been injured, just to see what's in place and what systems are in place for that workplace, or where the failures may have occurred, and how we can work with the PCBU to actually remedy those failures. So we have a range of areas that the inspectors are responsible for. One of them is a compliance campaign, such as this one that we're talking about today. So why are we having a look at distillers and alcohol producers? As you would all be aware, it's a growth industry. It's an emerging industry. We are seeing pop-ups or distilleries being set up right across not only South Australia but nationally, where alcohol producers have diversified compared to what we may have had 5 or 6 years ago. There's been a huge influx of distillers that have come into the market. We've also sadly seen an issue down in Tasmania where there was an explosion in a distillery. So that is what's brought it to the attention of Safe Work SA to have a look to make sure that the way that distilleries and alcohol producers are being established or set up, that they're being set up in an appropriate fashion and aren't creating any risk for either patrons or people that are working within the distilleries themselves. So, there's been a large increase in sales, and I'm sure that Ian and George will be able to tell us about that, of distilleries of recent years, and hence why we want to have a look at it. Not in a punitive sense, we're not coming out with a big stick, but we certainly want to assist where we can, and I'll let Dave go through the details of the audit itself, but we want this to be a proactive campaign. We want to engage with distillers to make sure that they have in place what they need to have. And we see this as a positive campaign for the growth of the industry. So I'll hand over to Dave to talk about the audit process itself, the campaign focus, and what we're looking at doing during the campaign.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. As Mark said, my name's Dave Barrett. I'm the team leader of the manufacturing and primary industries team. So I'm actually responsible with Mark for this campaign. So one of the things we've looked at is we're trying to work out, and thanks to George and Ian for helping with this. We wanted to go right back and have stakeholder engagement and work with the industry to find out, what are the dangers out there to the industry, to workers and the public. So what we want to actually do with this is we want our audit to focus on assisting and educating businesses, which are persons conducting a business or undertaking. So we want to look at what are their actual duties, how are they meeting those duties, and also mainly in relation to work health and safety, and it also crosses into the dangerous substance legislation. So a lot of you may or may not know that a big thing in this industry is compliance with the Australian Standard 1940, which looks at dangerous substances and storage. One of the biggest things that we need to look at in this industry is what we call hazardous atmospheres. So it's the explosive nature of what's actually being done. So that in line with things like exposure to electrical, intrinsic safety. If those of you that don't know what that means, that's to do with explosive rating. So that's a spark or something that's generated in a process which causes an ignition source, which can cause the ethanol to actually basically explode, which is what happened down in Tasmania. So what we've done is with the stakeholders is we've actually developed a proper audit tool, which is a standard process that we go through. So you will all be contacted before we come out. It is proactive. You're not just going to get random visits from people and not know what they're doing on your doorstep. So I've already had some inquiries from some of the distillers already, and they've made comments that do we know that they're just a family business? Yes, we do understand that, and we're going to work through it to make sure that you are, to assist you in meeting those obligations. So in the audit tool, we put together a proper program, and what that actually looks at, it looks at hazardous atmospheres. So the ethanol coming into the business, how you actually process it and maintain it. That's one of the biggest issues. We're going to be looking at sources of ignition. So what are the potentials for that ethanol to explode? So what could set it off? Going to look at ventilation. That's something that is very important. So how you actually ventilate your factory or your business, so you don't get a confined area where there is a higher risk of an explosion. We're also going to look at some other basic things that we do with all businesses. We're going to look at emergency evacuation plans. So what do you do in the event of emergency? How do you get your workers out of the premises or patrons that are there? We're going to look at things like confined spaces. So as George helped us out with when we did a visit, was that a lot of the confined spaces now generally don't need access by people. But if you do, there are things that we need to look at, because confined space access is extremely complicated. It's about, if you put your body inside of a tank, even your torso inside a tank, that could be defined as a confined space. So we'll work with you with that. The other thing that we find in industry is a lot of people, for some reason, still don't understand what a high-risk work license is for operating a forklift. So it's class LF, which means you need a license to operate that forklift. So if you don't have one, that's something we need to work with you with. So you don't just go and buy a forklift and start driving it. You need a license to operate it. So we'll go through that with people. The other thing that comes up quite a lot in industry, and in your industry as well, is pressure vessels. So things like air compressor receivers. So generally, as a ballpark figure, if it's around about 100 litres, it's probably going to need to be registered, but that's just a ballpark thing to go by. The other thing is pallet racking. That's another thing we're going to be looking at. So what's the pallet racking holding? Is it weight rated? You just don't go and put tons of weight on a pallet rack and you don't understand what it can hold. It's extremely dangerous. So that's something we'll have a look at as well. And then some other basic things like, what sort of personal protective equipment do you have for your workers, signage, training of people, things like safety data sheets. That's another low level thing, but you need to understand what chemicals you're actually going to be using and how your workers are going to be doing that. So I think the key takeaway from this is don't be overwhelmed by it. A lot of it is basic requirements that every business in South Australia needs to do. The major thing that stands out for you in relation to hazards is that explosive atmosphere. And that's, if George doesn't mind, if I use that as an example, when we went to their facility, that is the kind of thing that we want to see, is people understand that electricity can cause an explosion. So you need to have intrinsically safe fittings. You need someone to designate what the zone is. So one of the questions I got asked last week was, what do all these separation zones mean? What's that all about? So just to explain that briefly to you, because it is complicated, there's 3 zones. There's 0, 1, and 2. So you need somebody like a DG, dangerous goods specialist, or a competent person, an engineer who understands hazardous zones, to work out how far from your hazardous zone are you allowed to have electrical appliances or fittings. For example, a 0 zone means that there's a risk. There is a danger right there and there that it's going to cause an explosion. A 1 means that there's a lot lower risk, and then a level 2 means that there is the potential, but it's probably lower down the scale. For example, you could get a consultant to come in and they could work out your hazardous zones based on what you've got in place. And they might say, this is a zone 1. You need to have your electrical installations 3 meters away. So they really need to help you answer that question. That's probably the most challenging thing you're going to come across. The rest of it is things that we'll help you with, the industry will help you with. So that's something I think George and Ian can elaborate on later if they're okay with that. So that's fairly well what we're going to be looking at. Yeah, don't be overwhelmed with it, because we'll go through the audit tool with you. There's a lot of questions in there. I'll give you just one example of one of the first things that we're going to be looking at. So under Regulation 43 in the Work Health and Safety Regulations, there's some questions here. The first one says, does the person conducting the business have an actual evacuation procedure? So that's one thing we would want to see, or we'll help you. You can work towards that. Is the evacuation plan actually displayed in a prominent position so workers and the public know what to do? Is there effective means of communicating in the event of an emergency? How do you actually do that? And it just goes down that topic. So do you actually have firefighting equipment, and has it been tested? Fire extinguishers every 6 months, things like that. They're low-level things, but they could be really important to protect health and safety and also protect your asset. So they're the kind of things we're going to go through. Hazardous atmospheres, ignition sources, and all those other things I mentioned. There's actual sections through the whole audit tool. We'll work through that with you. The inspectors will go through it. So expect a call if you're on. There's 50 of them to start with that we're working with. So there's no reason why those people were picked. It was just random depending on where they are in the state, and we're just going to go and start working with them. So if you do get a call, that's because you've been selected in that audit process, and we'll work with you when it suits you for us to come out and go through it with you. So that's pretty well it for that side of it. The other thing that I think people always seem to ask us is, and Mark can elaborate on this, is what is the difference between when we come out getting an improvement notice and getting a prohibition notice? What does that actually mean? So,
and
yeah,
look, it's fairly clear. An improvement notice is a notice that we will give you time to fix a particular issue that's identified, and we'll actually work with you for a reasonable time frame. So if we notice that you haven't had your electrical equipment tested, that you will get an improvement notice to have that work undertaken. But we'll talk to you and go, okay, how long do you think you'll need to get that done? And that may be, look, we'll get someone out here in the next 3 weeks to get them to electrically test our gear. So we'll work and put that will give you 3 weeks to complete that task. If we see something that we consider is a urgent situation, that it's imminent risk to a person, then we will issue a prohibition notice. And a prohibition notice means that you can't actually use that bit of equipment, or you can't undertake a particular process until such time as you have it either resolved or fixed by a competent person, or assessed and a report supplied to us from a competent person. So they're the 2 notices that we will deal with. There could possibly be one other notice, and that's a Section 33 notice under the Dangerous Substance Act, where you may have chemicals that are stored. It depends on your volume of chemicals you have, how you're storing them, where you're storing them, whether that is appropriate. If it's not, then you may get a notice again to resolve that issue, that it brings it in line with the Act and the regulations. So they're pretty well the 3 notices that you will see. And a prohibition notice to actually stop a process or an activity, or to close a particular plant down, is not taken lightly by us. We understand that the ramifications that may have on business, and so we will talk to you about that if we start heading down that track, and give you the opportunity to engage. One of the things that we can also do is, if we find non-compliance, and that non-compliance can be rectified while the inspector is on site, then there won't be any notice issued in relation to it. It is only when that it can't be resolved while the inspector is there. Inspectors are under very clear instructions that if there is non-compliance at the time that you're leaving the site, then notices must be issued. But again, it'll all be done in consultation with you, and you'll be fully aware of the circumstances. So it's not as if we're not going to tell you and then walk away and all of a sudden you get an email with all these notices. You'll be fully aware before we leave the site.
Some classic ones that come up a lot for us, and we may find this when we do these audits, just examples of what Mark said. We come in and do the audit and we find that you've got a lot of portable electrical equipment that hasn't been tested or inspected. So you would get a basic notice for that to say that you've got 2 weeks or 4 weeks to get an electrician in or someone to come and do your test and tag and have a look at it for you. So that would be a low level thing for us, but it is about you meeting your compliance, your basic compliance needs. The other example of, say, a prohibition notice might be, we walk in on the day or we come to do something and someone's standing on the tines of a forklift getting things down off a pallet rack. Now, that's an immediate risk to health and safety. That's a fall from heights and someone could get killed or seriously injured. So we would prohibit that task of you doing that. The other classic one we come across quite a lot is people not having a high-risk work license. So there would be a prohibition put on the company to prohibit the use of that forklift for anybody that doesn't have a high-risk work license. So they're immediate things for us to look at. So that's just a basic example of the sort of things we can do. And I think that's pretty well part of what we're going to do. So yeah, we'll just go through the audit tool and you'll get a summary sheet at the end of that. And then, as Mark said, if there are any notices that come out of it, you'll be explained to you properly. and there'll be suitable time to do it unless it is an immediate risk to health and safety. So hopefully everybody understands that process.
Thank you very
That's
much,
good.
Dave. I
Yeah.
noticed, there were a couple of questions that popped up, and you actually addressed a couple of them. I think one was around time frame for rectification of, an improvement
Yep.
notice, and then you mentioned the time frame of either 2 or 4 weeks, or something that
Yep.
is reasonable, and hopefully people get a sense that from what you've said, you'll be there to sort of guide them through and help them, to get to where they need to be in a reasonable time frame. And that the things that you're looking for are all fairly, obvious, or they're part of the expected regulations. There was one question.
There's one thing, Dave, with that is this comes up a lot with places, depending on the location. And I've used this example for years. If you're running a business in Roxby Downs, you got, a pretty slim chance of getting somewhere out there the next day or that week. So we have to work with you. It's not a matter of just saying you're getting a week whether you like it or not. It doesn't work like that. It depends on the location. Like, we're having real trouble at the moment in South Australia getting people to come and inspect pallet racking, because there's a lot of industries that are non-compliant with pallet racking. So getting a competent person to come out and assess it for you and let you know what the weight loadings are, we have to be lenient and help you. We have to be mindful of that, of trying to get someone. So look, every one of these things is taken on their own merits. We don't have a plan where we say you're only getting a week regardless. It's all taken on its merits. So we work with people on those things.
And there's also the ability that, and Dave's right about pallet racking. I know we did some audits on pallet racking a couple of years ago, and in fact the industry came back to us that actually do the assessments of pallets and said, look, because of your audits, we've actually been smashed with work to go out and assess pallet racking. And we've actually now got a 6-week delay on being able to get out to workplaces. So with improvement notices, there's the ability to actually, for the inspector to extend the notice as long as you get back to them prior to the expiry. And it may very well be to say to the inspector, hey, listen, I've booked in the pallet racking to be assessed. Unfortunately, they actually can't come out until the 30th of June. So it's all booked in for the 30th of June. Can I please have my notice extended to beyond that date? And generally, we would extend it probably a week beyond the 30th of June to allow time for the assessment to occur and for the report to be written on what remediation actions may need to be taken. So there is movement within any improvement notice for delays that may occur that are outside of your areas of control.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Mark. I suppose I want to take us a little bit back to something you mentioned about separation distances, and this was something that I was going to ask Ian about as well. And George, you can jump in here as well if you have something to sort of add. There was a question about separation distances as it relates to dust as well. So someone here has asked, is a zone 21 or a zone 22? I'm not sure what those zones mean myself, but the dust part, for dust, is that part of the HAC certification and for intrinsically safe electrical equipment required? I don't know if you can see in the Q&A, but the question there is around zones. The dust, is that part of the HAC certification?
It would be in mining, in places like mining industry, and also in for people that store grain in silos, because dust is extremely explosive. So any static discharge or anything that could set off a spark can actually blow a silo to pieces. So yes, dust and grain dust, and that can be extremely explosive. So it's not going to be something in your industry, I wouldn't think. Yours is going to be more about the ethanol. So I wouldn't be overly worrying about that at this stage.
And
We don't want
Ian,
to we
what did you
don't
want
want to complicate it too much for you, because it's a lot to take in. We'd rather the basic things get done and you work out what your hazardous zone is and you put controls in place. I hope that's answered that.
Yep, thanks, Dave. And
The other
Ian,
question
do you
I
want to
seen
jump in
pop
with
up too
something?
was someone asked, where do I get the dangerous substances regulations from? If you go online to the SWSA website under the legislation and or resources, you'll find it in there. You can look it up. There's the Act, the regulations, dangerous substance, and all the other things in there that you need. So you can actually look at those and save a link to them in a PDF or in a Word document.
Yes, thanks, Dave, as well. And I've got some resources and links coming up on a slide further down the track. So, Ian, I noticed you've got your mic unmuted. Did you want to jump in there about the distances?
Oh yeah, I'd start with dust though. Dust is an issue with grain distilleries, whisky distilleries. There's been instances in Scotland of explosions in grain mills. They're very rare, but typically if you get some contamination in your grain and it goes through the mill, by contamination I mean a nut or a bolt or something goes down, and as it goes through the rollers it strikes a spark and you've got dust everywhere, then there's a few instances of explosions in distilleries from that sort of thing. So it's something you've got to be aware of, but in all honesty, it's not a big issue with the scale of operation we operate, but it is still a risk. Back to distances, that's a confusing thing. I've had people read AS 1940 and say, oh, I can have separation distance between my still and the public of 3 metres or 4 metres or 5 metres or 8 metres. And depending which section you read in AS 1940, you get a different answer. And that's why you need to consult a dangerous goods expert to define your zones. Once you've got your zones defined, the rest is pretty easy and straightforward. I believe you have a fairly extensive list of DG experts or engineers that you could make available to us for consulting on that purpose.
We've sent that through already, Ian. I think Ali, we sent a link to Ali about that.
Good. The only other thing I've got to say to you really is that the Australian Distillers Association recognised the need for some training, and the Act requires business owners to train their employees on a regular basis on the hazards of workplace, and there was no available training, so we built our own course. It's not an accredited course, but it's pretty comprehensive, and in South Australia, the first 2 courses for our one-day safety course designed to be used almost as an induction or a white card basis, the same as the white card in the construction industry, is being run at Prohibition Gin on the 4th and the 5th of June, 2 one-day courses. The cost is $295 plus GST per member. Per person who's attending the course, it's $500 for non-members. So that's a good reason to join Distillers SA. And if you go to the website for Australian Distillers Association, on the top of the menu, there's a thing that says training. Click on the training button and scroll down, and you'll be able to find right towards almost the very bottom of the page, the 2 courses for training in Prohibition facility in June 4 and 5 of this year. So it's just a couple of weeks away. And I'd recommend very strongly that you get someone to do it, at least one person, if not more. That's about it, really.
Excellent.
Ian, just to follow on from that, there's just something that you said, about strongly, supporting or promoting people to join the association. I just wanted to say that you and George with this this is probably the best stakeholder engagement I've had with the campaigns we've done so far. It's been really helpful. And it's really highlighted a lot of things that we're not experts in this field and we're not consultants. So it was really good to get that feedback from stakeholders. It's a very good association, I thought.
Well, it's really important to us because it's going to make a huge difference to our businesses if we have
Absolutely.
And even as it turns out, it may be that the cost of remediating some of these things is too much for some of us, and we may have to look at other ways of running our other ways of running our business, such as outsourcing. I'm building a new distillery right now, and I'm spending 45 grand on just ventilating one room. And the landlord for the property, when he looked at the cost of ventilation and firewalls for what was going to be our Zone 2 barrel room, said, shit, it's cheaper for me to build a separate standalone building. than actually remediate the one that was already there. And we're talking serious money, sort of $250,000 or more. And that may be prohibitive for many of our members. They have to rethink the way they run their business.
Hey, just something to expand on, Ian, that you raised. When we talk about 1940, one of the things that, and I'll try and get if you want to, I'll get this put on later, but there's a document here that I referred to. 1940 calls up an Australian standard called explosive atmospheres. And it's, for those of you that want to write it down, it's ASNZS 60079 of 2022. Now, what that talks about in there, because this is really important, because it is a confusing point. With those zones, what it says is it has the 3 zones in here, and I'll just read this out to you. It says zone 0, it's an area in which an explosive gas atmosphere is present continuously or for long periods of frequency. The other ones are, so in number 1, which is the next, is the lesser of them. Obviously, it's going down. So zone 1, it says an area which an explosive gas atmosphere is likely to occur occasionally in normal operation. And then a 2, which is the lowest of them all. It says an area which an explosive gas atmosphere is not likely to occur in normal operation, but if it does, it will exist for a short period of time. And something Ian said, which hit the nail on the head, your DG specialist will be able to work out which zone you have, and then that will determine how far away your electrical installations need to be. But remember, where your still is, any motors or anything on that still would need to be intrinsically safe, because they are directly in line with that explosive atmosphere. But that is probably the most complicated part of this whole audit that you need to get your head around, is what is our explosive atmosphere, and how are we going to designate that to stop people walking in there and creating a spark. So hopefully that makes that a little bit simpler for you to understand.
Thanks, Dave. Can you read out that code again, the ASNZ?
Yeah, I'll read it out exactly as it is. It's
the number of the code.
Yeah, it's ASNZS IEC 60079.10.1 of 2022. And it is actually called Explosive Atmospheres, Classification of Areas for Explosive Gas Atmospheres. So that's an Australian standard called up in 1940, and it's also called up in 1596. So you can refer to that. It's quite helpful. Your specialist will know that.
Another question that I have seen is someone asking about these Australian standards. And I know that the Australian standards are prohibitively expensive to get hold of, thanks to the way that they're owned. SafeWork SA does actually have a license for calling up Australian standards, and we have a library service as well. So it's at this point that I just want to give a shout out to SafeWork SA's free library service. There are many Australian standards which are available, which can be sent out to you in a reply paid envelope, which you can send back to us. There is one caveat to that: you're not supposed to reproduce that material. They're copyright and they're not supposed to be reproduced, but they're certainly allowed to be. We lend them out to members of our library. So if you go to SafeWork SA's website, you can sign up to the library for free. I think that sort of, I guess, covers as much about separation distances as I had anticipated. But I do want to ask George a little bit more about intrinsic safety equipment and sort of what that might look like in a practical sense inside a distillery. If you could give us some examples, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm no expert on this stuff, but at a very broad level, it's really important when you're sourcing your equipment to try and ensure you've requested certification of being intrinsically safe from your suppliers. Obviously, stills is a huge a huge one, because it is the sort of highest risk kind of source, specifically heating elements. Good news is that nowadays the industry's gotten so much better. So even if you're buying an Australian still or a Chinese still these days, it is quite achievable to get intrinsically safe certification, and if you need to get a local electrician to also certify the installation. So the industry has certainly come a long way in recent years, and that's easier than ever. The other thing to consider is your other ignition sources in your hazardous zones. So really anything that's a electrical source, an ignition source. So whether it be power points, lighting, scales, any piece of equipment that you're using in your area, the obviously the best way to do that is to remove those sources from the area in the first place. That's going to be the cheapest way, because actually getting equipment that is compliant is extremely expensive. So designing your distillery and utilizing your space so that those ignition sources are not present is the best way to go. Also note the different certifications. So the Australian certification is IECEX. This is important because to be compliant with Australian standards, you need compliance with that standard, whereas other international standards like ATEX may be overlapping and may be practically quite good, but aren't necessarily going to provide that certification with Australian standards. So that's important to specify when dealing with your suppliers. I had quite a few broader comments, Dave. Do you want me to go into that now or hold off till later on? I think you're just on mute there.
Sorry, mate, what was that?
Yeah, no, I think while we're on the topic, go ahead and answer.
Yeah, so I guess just a bit of perspective from the industry. Firstly, it's great to see so many people on here, 55 people. We've got a membership of 60 members at the moment, so clearly it reflects the importance of this area for people. It can be daunting to get across all the requirements. Actually trying to read AS 1940 is like reading Latin sometimes. But the really good news is that there's never been a better time as an industry to go through this, because the resources, the availability of consultants, the knowledge of suppliers, and the compliance of suppliers with standards has come a long way over the last few years. I mean, a few years ago, people really, self-included, had really no idea where to start when it came to distillery compliance, and now there's so many great resources and so many great people around to assist. I'd also just like to recognise the really collaborative approach that SafeWork have taken here. It's really great to see them reaching out to the industry in advance of commencing any audit activity, consulting with industry, really trying to understand the practicalities of what it means to run a distillery, what our membership looks like, what the key challenges are going to be for people in terms of practically achieving compliance, so that we can work together on making the industry as safe as possible without making it impossible to run a business. So yeah, thank you to David, Mark and David for the effort that they've taken with their teams to come out and visit Iniquity and Never Never, and to learn about the industry and take on feedback in the best way to engage the industry. I'd also just make a comment that there's a huge spectrum of distillers in our membership, from some relatively large operations right down to tiny backyard operations. It obviously can be trickier for smaller distilleries with few resources, to spend on consultants and fancy equipment, and have expertise to deal with these issues. But it also, the risks to manage are a lot smaller if you're dealing with very small volumes, and you've got, you know, space to move things around, and, you know, there's some really easy wins that can be practically taken to ensure safe operations. So the best thing for everyone to do is to engage with the industry associations. So Ian mentioned before the safety courses that are being run on the 4th and 5th of June. Many of you may know, as we've signalled in the past, that we're actually working on a full reciprocal membership partnership between Distillers South Australia and Australian Distillers. We've just hired a new executive officer to replace Ali. That's Chloe Reschke-Maguire. Chloe doesn't start in her full part-time capacity for another few weeks, so we'll send an announcement out to everyone once she's commenced, but we've already started handover activity. Chloe's going to be a great resource for helping share information on things like these safety courses, things like the list of appropriate consultants that can help you with these compliance matters, and further resources like our Certificate 4 in distilling that we'll be rolling out most likely next year. So please ensure that if you're not already, you're a member of Distillers South Australia, because we'll be keeping you up to date through our EDMs on all these resources as they unfold. That's really the best thing you can do, and yeah, I guess also, you know, speak with each other about the practical steps that people have taken in their distillery to improve compliance and safety. That'll sort of put you in a good position for getting further assistance from SafeWork to make it a safer and more compliant operation.
Yeah, thanks very much, George. It's well said. You know, there's a lot of you know, moving parts and a lot of things happening in this space, but I think you summed it up pretty well there. Just one thing I just want to know. Now, I don't know a whole lot about the electrical side and talk about intrinsically safe. Would a regular electrician, if someone is engaging an electrician to come and help them with something in their workplace, are regular electricians fully up to speed with this type of terminology, the intrinsically safe?
No, it would need to be an industrial electrician who's appropriately qualified in this area. I don't know the exact language and requirements in the various standards and legislation, but I believe there's some kind of concept of like an appropriately qualified person, and that's sort of a judgment call. But I mean, more importantly, you need someone who practically understands it, so they can actually give you some practical assurance around these things. So again, that'll be one area where, as an industry association, we'll be trying to collect some lists of appropriately qualified people that members can use for that.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, it sounds like getting yourself across the Latin, as you said, with those Australian standards and how they you know, work in conjunction with the regulations. That's an area, one area that, you know, I think needs, you know, further consideration, perhaps, or at least some detailed consideration. And then you've got that whole other side of safety, which is the more general side, and those you know, simple things like firefighting equipment, signage, you know, evacuation plans, and the like.
Yeah, I just also, if I could, just like to thank Ian for the work he's done on safety for the industry. For those of you who don't know, Ian is on the safety subcommittee of Australian Distillers, and he's been one of the sort of most proactive people in the industry about championing safety, and will continue to you know, help play that role for the industry in South Australia. So thanks Schmitty.
Excellent, thanks, George. So I suppose moving on from our main topics now, I suppose we do have some time for Q&A, and I'm going to kick that off in just a moment. But first of all, I do want to, I guess, just briefly plug some of the resources that are on the SafeWork SA website. If you haven't already had a look, it's worth jumping on. Distillers SA spent a little bit of time with SafeWork SA, I guess, sharing and verifying some of these resources so that they actually do match, you know, the current current needs and what's relevant and what is actually useful. So there's a landing page here. I've put it on this slide. You know, you can actually just use the search function from our website. In the top banner there, it says search website. If you type in distilleries, you can find this page, or you can go down through workplaces, which is the banner at the top that says workplaces, and eventually you'll find distilleries. If you scroll down through this page, you'll find a whole heap of links and resources, some of which we've spoken about today. So, for example, storage of flammable liquids. There is a link there to the Safe Work Australia guidance material. I've just popped a picture of the PDF there, and on the other side is I suppose a safety alert type of poster, a fact sheet, which talks about some of the obvious hazards that ethanol presents. So with that, let's get into some questions of yours. It looks like there are a few questions in the chat and a few questions in the Q&A. So I'll try to alternate between the two, and we'll see if we can get to them as we go. So Ian and George and Dave and Mark, just be ready for something to be fired across at you. Someone's asked if we could send a link to where they can sign up for the courses with Distillers SA. I'm not sure if someone could post that into the chat, perhaps.
Yeah, I don't have the link handy, but it will be sent through the Distillers SA EDM.
EDMs, yep, fantastic. Yeah. No worries. Someone has just done us a solid there and posted it to the chat. Thank you very much, guys. Someone mentioned earlier about a copy of the AS 1940, and as I said, this may have popped up when I wasn't looking at it. You might be able to get a copy of that through the Safe Work SA library. I know that we have quite a few of the Australian standards in hard copy form. Not all the Australian standards are actually embedded in as part of regulations. So I think we do have a pretty good library of the standards which are related to regulation. So it might well be that we have it there. And if we don't have it, we do have a license to get it, and you can borrow that. Just coming back to the chat here. Someone has actually answered sort of a question for us about Sparkies that can do intrinsically safe work, but it seems like they require a special cert to do that kind of IEC-EX wiring.
That's a great point that George raised, David, about that, because we get a lot of people who they just go and engage a Sparky, they spend a lot of money with them, and then they find out when we go back that it's not compliant. So a lot of that was generated from the mining industry for explosive atmospheres. So there is some very good companies out there that specialize in that. And a lot of people always ask us, how do I know something's intrinsically protected? There's simple things that you can become aware of. Things like they have a lot of, they have stainless steel glands around a lot of motor fittings, conduit, a flexible conduit, the rubber conduit that stops any vapor getting inside of the electrical fittings. Things like intrinsically safe lighting. Once you become familiar at looking at it, you can recognize it pretty straight, pretty quick. So yeah, don't make sure that whoever you engage knows what they're doing, because that's a good point what George said. Just don't go and get any electrician and think they know what they're doing.
Perfect. Thank you, Dave. I'm just looking ahead to see if there's any other questions in the chat. What I might do is, because we've got a few minutes left, if I go back to the topics that we were going to speak about today, if anyone here is watching and is interested in looking at some of those topics and feels that there's something else they still haven't caught on to, please feel free to use the meeting chat. While we've got everyone here, this is a great opportunity to ask some questions. Ian's just posed a question here. Dangerous good regulations have an exemption for potable spirits for a dangerous goods license. Is that still the case for NG?
What that means is that there is a section in that legislation that says that if a product is being consumed, if it's what's called a potable product, if it's being brought in as a raw material and consumed straight away, there's probably a good chance that it would be deemed to not need a license. If you bring in an IBC of, say, 1,000 litres of ethanol and it's sitting there, that's not being consumed straight away. So there's a bit of a grey area with that. I hope that makes sense. So yes, there are things that are potable that aren't required to have a DG license, a dangerous substance license.
Yeah, I've had a conversation with the dangerous substances team on this point, and their view is that at that percentage of ABV, it's not potable. So it wouldn't be considered a potable spirit until it's processed, in a form that is suitable, like, distilled and watered down, suitable for consumption.
Yeah, that's good. Hey, just the other thing I want to mention, David, is that I think I covered off on this. We're looking at 50 actual businesses to start with. So we have quite a large list of them. I think I've got a list of, I think it's about 120 or 130. So we will be looking at 50 first to start with, and then we'll look at later maybe another campaign to look at another group. Then the other thing that we want to look at in the future is we want to look at microbreweries. So that's a separate thing again, but just to let you all know. And the other point I wanted to raise too, and this comes up a lot when we do campaigns, is just remember something, that when these guys and girls come out to see you, they are doing a job. Have a bit of respect for them, because they do cop it sometimes from abusive people who basically question, what are we doing there? You don't have the right to be on my premises. The thing we don't do is we don't want to go to have to say, yes, we actually do have the right to enter anywhere where we believe is a workplace, and do all the things we can in the Act. So all I say with that is just work with them, because they've got a job to do. They don't want to come out and get abused by people. So it gets quite trying sometimes when you deal with aggressive clients. So yeah, try to just work with them. They're not there to beat you over the head. They're there to try and improve the industry, because if we can save people's lives and stop them getting injured, then that's a win for us. So just something to take into consideration, that's all.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Dave. Someone here asks about licensing, and this is I guess it's a good question. Covering dangerous goods storage licensing. The question here is, when is that required? So is there a certain threshold or a limit to the amount of dangerous goods that someone stores until, a threshold when they become licensed?
Yeah, we generally relate to it as refer to it as dangerous substances. So in that legislation, it talks about having 120 litres or more. So it depends what you're storing, how you're storing it. This is one thing I wanted to make clear at the start, is don't get overwhelmed by it all. There are things that we can deal with on the day and help you through. So if you're storing large quantities of dangerous substances over that amount, like George pointed out, you're going to need a license. You need a DS license to store it. So once you get that license, there's a lot of requirements for storage, and it depends on how you're storing it. So it can be bunding, it can be all sorts of distances for separation and signage, and how you actually do that, whether it's stored on spill-proof pallets, or whether it's stored in an area where it's bunded so it doesn't run down the drains, and then you've got a problem with the EPA, with the contamination of things. So don't get overwhelmed with it all. It's something we can help you through. We've got that in our audit tool, and we can help you with that. So yeah, 120 litres is the limit for a lot of that stuff. It's very complicated. It talks about packaging groups and all sorts of things. So don't get too bogged down in it at the moment. We can sort that out.
You're on mute.
You're on mute, Dave.
Great job, host. Sam here asks, has anyone from SafeWork ever done any, or doing any level testing of facilities while in operation? It's my understanding that that's not part of the process in the audit.
No, we're not consultants. We seek that the business or the PCBU engage competent people to actually undertake that.
I would add to that you know, LEL like monitoring is a relatively cost-effective safety check that that people should consider for their operations. And while consultants will do that as part of their assessment, it's a really good thing just to have around for general and periodic use.
Yeah, thanks, George. I think what that speaks to is the need for you know, some of that testing to be done, and it may be that inspectors might ask, you know, have you had that sort of testing done in this area, and have you got any records of that? So that may form part of it. But yeah, they certainly don't come out with measuring tools to see, you know, see what the atmospheres are at the time. There's a little bit more chat there about HAC consultants. Someone saying that they can only find them in Melbourne. Questions seem to have dried up there. I'll quickly check the chat, and then I think we've hit our time limit. It sounds like most of the questions have finished over there as well. Don't forget, Distillers SA have mentioned that they're going to post out to you, you know, I think it was a list of potential consultants that could be useful in this space. So, you know, stay tuned to what they're sending you as well. What I'll do, guys, is we'll finish off by letting you know that you can always head to our website for more information. I want to thank everyone for being here today, those people that have joined us in attendance, and also to the panel. Thank you, Ian and George, for spending your time with us. Thank you to Mark and Dave for coming on today and sharing all this information. I know that it's going to be very useful to people as they, you know, are wondering what's going on in this space. So thank you to everyone for being here. If you do need any more information, you can head to our website or Distillers SA. I mentioned the web page about distilleries, and also you can contact us on using our email, which is help.safework@sa.gov.au, or you can contact our help centre using the 1300 number there on your screen. So I'd encourage you, if you need any more information or assistance, to reach out to either SafeWork or to Distillers SA. Thank you very much, everyone, and good luck. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone.